they wanted to humiliate me. They wanted to embarrass me. They wanted to make sure that I lost my job. They had no idea, nor did I, of the public reaction that would come from this. But the reason I mentioned Milo Yiannopoulos is that if they had left me alone and not done anything and just kind of swept it under the rug, it wouldn't have been anywhere near the big of a deal that it was. And I told them specifically, don't do this. Like, instead of like finding someone, to be upset with, why don't you look at, entire wings of university architecture are dedicated to things that are just false. They're just not true. Why don't you be sincere and look at this and honestly examine this? But they weren't interested in that. They wanted to torture me. And they were successful.
Ladies and gentlemen, how do you have conversations with people with whom you don't agree? And how do you do it in a way that is calm? And why do it, especially in our social media age where the algorithm that you have is just going to keep feeding you things that affirm what you already believe, which might be one big reason our country and even the world is so polarized. Well, my friend, Dr. Peter Boghossian, who originally was a member or a faculty member at Portland State University's philosophy department, until they went so far illiberal that he could no longer tolerate it, is my guest today. He was the guest on the previous podcast. We met at UC Berkeley when we were out there. Peter's an atheist. I'm a Christian, but we have a lot in common, and we're having a discussion about how can we save Western civilization? What can we do to save the freedoms that allow us to have freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, because they are going away unless the direction of Europe and the United States changes. And Peter now, since he's no longer at Portland State, is on the road 24/7, 365, trying to get people to think more clearly about the freedoms that we have and how to defend them. So for that, he gets another great round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
I have to carry that around with me every time I'm down about Western Civ. I'll just press the button to get
That's right. Hey, by the way, Peter, now I need to warn you that if you do say something that really is clearly not factual, you're going to hear this.
Wrong.
Okay. And by the end of this, if I'm no longer interested, you're going to hear,
you're fired.
All right. But
the pressure is on me.
But no, Peter, we had a great discussion in the previous podcast. We're just going to continue our discussion here. People have to know about the experiment that you, James Lindsay, and Helen Pluckrose actually conducted back in 2017 to point out the ideological insanity of the academy. Can you tell us what happened there?
Sure. Yeah, I never think about that stuff anymore. There are reasons I don't think about that stuff anymore. But I was surrounded in a sea of utter madness. And again, I haven't thought about this stuff in years. And I kept trying to figure out why these insane, completely deranged policies were being institutionalized. And every time I would ask people, it was amazing. Nobody had an answer to it. Can I say the word PENIS on your show?
Of course, go.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Figure I'd spell it out just in case. So we were inspired by Alan Sokal, who's now a friend of mine, who wrote the famous Sokal hoax, the first paper he submitted in the late 90s to Social Text. He basically was a nonsense paper where he used fancy words. He's a physics professor and mathematician. He told me at dinner one night, he's like, yeah, all this stuff in physics, all this lifetime work in mathematics, in my obituary in the New York Times, no one's going to care about anything. They're just going to care about my hoax paper. He hoaxed with just gibberish and nonsense, the most famous postmodern journal. So we were inspired by that. So we submitted, this is actually a really funny story I haven't thought about in a while. We were trying to think about the craziest idea we could submit. And I think the original idea we came up with was that all potatoes are sexist.
Potatoes are sexist.
Yeah.
Mr. Potato Head, sexist. Okay.
And back, yeah, we could have put Mr. Potato Head in there too. Uh-huh. And back when, because we want to make a really silly, ridiculous paper and have them publish it. But when I used to use Google, I came up with all these results with potatoes being sexist. So then we came up with the idea that because these people believe literally everything is a social construct, that we would say that the penis is a social construct.
Okay.
So
right.
we published this paper about the conceptual penis, we called it, and we hoaxed a fairly low-level journal, and we wanted to kind of duplicate the Sokol thing. And then the usual suspects lost their freaking minds. They went crazy. This doesn't do what, you say it does. It doesn't prove what you said. And so they also said in the same breath, this is interesting. They also said, if you want to do what you're claiming to do, that there are problems in these, what we call grievance studies, grievance fields, you have to do the following: A, B, C, D, publish more papers, publish them in higher tier journals. And I called James Lindsay on the phone and I said, Jim, dude, this is awesome. They've given us a recipe for what we need to do to succeed. By the way, Slate, Salon, all these leftist rags were putting out hit pieces on me, on us, but on me, because I was vulnerable because I had an institutional position at a university. And I would email or call them and say, I'm more than happy to talk to you about this. I'd like to write a rebuttal, I'd like to write a response. Crickets, nothing. Because that's not what they do. We talked about in the previous conversation, they don't have conversations. They don't have a dialectic. They don't have a discussion. Everybody is an existential enemy and they won't talk to you. They won't platform you.
Mm-hmm.
So then we spent the next year writing intentionally broken, completely deranged, morally repugnant papers. And we got busted by the Wall Street Journal when we had, I think, 7 accepted or published. And then I think we had 5 more under review, if memory serves me correctly. And I'm fairly confident that those would have gotten, a fair number of those would have gotten accepted. And the idea, I actually got this, you'll appreciate this. I got this from the New Atheist movement, this idea. And the idea was that if you want to delegitimize an idea, you go after the canonical texts. So if you want to delegitimize grievance studies, because I knew there was no there, then you do that by publishing completely broken, fraudulent, published, version of Mein Kampf, Hitler's Mein Kampf in there. And so that's what we did until we got caught by the Wall Street Journal.
So you got peer reviewed, and the peers of your papers accepted that the penis was a social construct.
Yeah, that was the first one. I mean, that paper is like totally deranged, but it's it's a humorous paper. It's funny. If you haven't read it, you should totally sit down over a glass of wine one night and read it. It's actually really, really funny. We put every kind of vulgarity we could in there that we could think of. It's actually really funny. But the more serious one is, I can't remember, dog parks.
You did one apparently where you observed, if I remember correctly, the mating habits of dogs in dog parks. And you noticed apparently that the male dogs were a little bit too aggressive with the females. And if I remember this right, then that somehow you could transfer that to human beings somehow. It's like,
yeah, I think it's even worse than that. I think
okay.
I think we claimed, if memory serves me correctly, that we closely examined the genitals of 10,000 dogs and then interrogated their owners as to their sexual orientations.
And somehow that the rape culture of the dog park, it shows oppression that we could then apply to men and women. And somehow that got past peer review.
It got an award.
It got an award.
It got an award. We talked about that on Rogan. It got an award. It was published in the most prestigious. Again, we did exactly what these people told us to do. But if these people had even a modicum, an iota of integrity, they would have said, "Wow, we asked you to do this. You did. Well, they didn't ask us, but we told you what you needed to do to succeed, to show that there's a problem of ideological corruption in certain fields, and you did it. And now we need to sincerely look at these journals and look at the kinds of ideas they're forwarding and ask ourselves honestly, are these ideas tethered to reality?" But they did not do that. Instead, they brutally attacked me. I was brought up on all these charges, which is actually a really funny story. I'm in the room and all the recording devices are going on. And one of the charges they brought, this is awesome. I haven't thought about this stuff in years. I should think about this stuff every time I see the decay in society. Cheers me up. They brought me up on the charge of plagiarism for plagiarizing Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf. And the first thing I did, in my trial was I admitted to plagiarizing Mein Kampf. I said I did it. I admit it. And I kept repeating it. I plagiarized Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf. I submitted it. I am guilty to their own charge. But the reason that they had to find me not guilty of the charge that they brought me up on that I confessed to is because that would mean that their ideological bedfellows had published Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf.
So they were damned either way, right? No matter what they said, they were indicting themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of, again, I haven't thought about this stuff in years, but it kind of reminds me of my dad died in Las Vegas. I was at the funeral, and then we went to this like dinner afterward, and all these people were talking to me about Milo Yiannopoulos. And I just thought, like, why are these people talking to me about Milo Yiannopoulos? It's weird. My dad just died. I'm emotional and talking about Milo Yiannopoulos. But it kind of, I told them, like, don't do this. Like, don't bring me up on any charges. Sokol wasn't brought up on any charges. This is not, but they wanted to humiliate me. They wanted to embarrass me. They wanted to make sure that I lost my job. They had no idea, nor did I, of the public reaction that would come from this. But the reason I mentioned Milo Yiannopoulos is that if they had left me alone and not done anything and just kind of swept it under the rug, it wouldn't have been anywhere near the big of a deal that it was. And I told them specifically, don't do this. Like, instead of like finding someone, to be upset with, why don't you look at, entire wings of university architecture are dedicated to things that are just false. They're just not true. Why don't you be sincere and look at this and honestly examine this? But they weren't interested in that. They wanted to torture me, and they were successful.
I want to go back to our previous conversation in the last podcast. And folks, if you haven't listened to the first podcast, it's the last one we did. Peter and I did. Dr. Peter Boghossian and I did. Because Peter, and this is from your book, Manual for Creating Atheists, you point out that so often people don't pay attention to facts. They are taking action based on morality. What is the morality that that your little escapade there exposed or threatened? Maybe that's a better word. What morality did you threaten by getting those false papers published under peer review in these journals?
That a lot. That certain conclusions are forwarded if they agree with the dominant moral orthodoxy, which is that there are marginalized and oppressed people. These people happen to have certain identity characteristics with an identity level salience, homosexuals, trans people. There's also a hierarchy, indigeneity, etc. Now I actually throw midgets every time I publish anything. I always make sure I put the word midget in there. I just published a piece in Lawrence Krauss's book. I got that in there. Smuggled it in. But so I challenge the idea that the conclusions that they forwarded were not only untrue, but could be taken even further. For example, is this a family podcast? It
is, but go ahead. You can say it a certain way. Yeah.
All right. I'll try to say it a certain way. So, okay. So, huge trigger warning for your audience. This is absolutely not family fare. So
okay. All right.
Kids out of the room. But we had to do this to publish in these. We had to talk about these ideas.
I'll tell you what.
Crazy.
Say what you need to say. We'll beep anything that people understand. Go ahead.
So we submitted this paper for why is it that men don't like large objects inserted in their and heterosexual men, and we were saying it's because they're homophobic. And we submitted this, and again, you don't have to believe me. Everything we've published, all the reviewers' comments, everything is completely transparent. It's all online. It's all there for people to see. So, and it's free. I don't make any money off of this. I want to expose the rot, the ideological corruption. And the reviewer said, you just can't make it up. The reviewer said, no, it's not because they're homophobic. It's because they're transphobic. And I didn't even understand the comment. And I talked to Jim and James, and I said, dude, like, I don't even get this. And he said to me, I know, it's genius. Let's run with it. And so we wrote this paper that said the reason that men don't want things in their the large objects in their is because they have a irrational fear of trans people. And we call it trans hysteria. And we tried to, the goal was to let this sit in the literature and have other people cite it and make our own vein of literature in which everybody is thinking that they're trans, that they're afraid of trans people if they don't like large objects inserted in. So, but unfortunately, again, we got caught before that.
Oh, so it didn't spread any further then.
No, we spread any further. No, I could make a very inappropriate joke about
Okay,
that.
so,
No.
so wait a minute, Peter. How was this discovered by somebody at the Wall Street Journal? What happened?
Well, I made a key mistake. So we fabricated everything. In fact, we put up a website, a fake website where we had phony credentials. And these credentials, Frank, they were hilarious. You know, like, what do you do in your free time? And, you know, one of the people, we found images and we put bindies on people. You know, I don't have I live in, you know, New Mexico with her 2 cats and her 3 wives. And I don't have any time for, you know, freedom is oppression and all this stuff. But anyway,
Okay, all right.
we got caught because I made a crucial mistake with the dog park paper. We had to fabricate, you know, because the whole thing was a fiction. We fabricated fake institutes. We fabricated everything. But I fabricated a PhD in feminist studies as opposed to a PhD in gender studies. And somebody looked into it and found every single person had a PhD in feminist studies, and the putative author, Helen, I can't remember her name, she was not one. But if I had just not made that one mistake and said gender studies instead, wouldn't have gotten caught.
Well, at some point you wanted to be caught so that you could blow the top off all this.
We
right?
had to be caught, but we didn't want to get caught because we gave ourselves 1 year and we still had 5 papers out for review. And that was way before AI or anything. I mean, you know, I was just sitting down there drinking glasses of wine and thinking about the craziest stuff. Like truly not only just crazy, but morally vile and revolting. Like putting white kids on chains and speaking over them in the classroom as a form of experiential reparations. I mean, crazy stuff. And so, and that's the other thing that I learned as a result of this, you know, because when I originally wrote this paper, and there's just so much in there. There's so much in the statement. I originally thought, well, you know, these things are so demonstrably ugly and so malicious that nobody is possibly going to accept this. So I found this line of literature about, you know, being compassionate to people when we abuse them. And so for the idea of putting white kids in chains and speaking over them and oppressing them and yelling at them, etc., I thought, well, you know, this is too crazy. You know, even the craziest person is going to think that this is morally wrong. So I put this little, you know, line of literature about, but we need to be compassionate to people when we abuse them, basically. And the reviewers wrote back and said, no, we don't. We don't need to be compassionate. These people are oppressors. And it just completely blew my mind. It's like, it completely blew my mind.
And now you know, if the evidence that we have is good and it appears to be good, Charlie Kirk was shot.
Correct. Yeah. All of these things are related. So that's the thing, Frank, that other people don't understand. All of this stuff is downstream of the university. People just don't get that. It's not that this guy ex nihilo just happens to go out and start murdering people. There's a pool in which people get these ideas. There's an infrastructure in place. There's an academic, there's a literature, there's a long pedigree, a history of citations and citations of people who's citing other citations. And then the universities themselves act as indoctrination factories, where the goal is to replicate the dominant moral orthodoxy. And that's exactly what they've done. And that's the thing that people don't understand. But if you really want to know what people don't understand, and I've been so busy, I haven't tackled this, but I think that this is a key to saving Western civilization. You have to figure out what is the wellspring of the idea. What is the wellspring? The wellspring of the idea is teacher certification programs. You can't teach. It doesn't matter. You have a PhD. I have a PhD. I have tons of publications, high H. None of that stuff matters. Sorry. Bleep that out.
You're right. Go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah. None of that stuff matters. You need to, in this country at least, I can't speak for other countries, but you need to get a teacher certification. And you get those from colleges of education. And in colleges of education, they don't have the model that you and I have. It's not a truth model. It's Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed. It's everybody's oppressed, how to remediate oppression. And we've now trained generations of teachers in K through 12 education to think about things in terms of systemic oppression. How do you fight systems? How do you dismantle systems? And so those people then become teachers who indoctrinate our children in K through 12 education. Again, this is not a truth-seeking pedagogy. It's not a way to find truth. Truth is totally irrelevant. It's all about power and power and oppression. So, if you want to know how we're in this mess, and this, Linda McMahon can completely solve this problem. That's the other thing with Charlie. Charlie said that one of the last texts I had from Charlie was that he would go to war for me to become, I still save the text, the Secretary of Education. And then we went from the Secretary of Education, and I actually flew, but for political reasons I didn't have it. But again, this is a long thing. But here's my advice to Linda McMahon, which I said from day one.
Secretary of Education, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah.
Yeah. So what you need to do, you can pretty much solve this problem with the wave of a wand. Here's what you need to do. Everybody, all of the universities are beholden to what I call the accreditation cartel. Now, I'm full disclosure, I'm a member of the founding faculty fellow at the University of Austin. That's my university affiliation. That's a new university that's on right now in its second year in Austin, Texas.
Is Elon Musk behind that?
No,
Not
to my knowledge. Oh, Joe Lonsdale, Barry Weiss, Neil Ferguson. A lot of people have made very generous donations.
Barry Weiss is CBS now?
Yeah.
Right there? Okay. All right.
Yep. So, but universities need to become accredited. And the way they get accredited is through an accrediting body. But there's a kind of, to mix metaphors, to borrow something from the Lord of the Rings, there's kind of a one ring. There's one accreditation body that is behind all of the other accreditation bodies. And they are caught in the orbit of critical social justice. They're caught in the orbit of this. Everybody's oppressing, there's oppressors. We need to remediate this and rip down systems and teach people this. If you got rid of that, and they're directly certified by the Department of Education, Trump wants to do away with the Department of Education. Actually, Charlie said to me, are you okay with being the last Secretary of Education? I'm like, great. Yep. Because I'm telling you, Frank, when I would walk into one of those rooms, they would tremble. They would know what's coming for them. I would have come for all of them, all of the infrastructure, everything. Anyway, didn't happen. So I hope Linda McMahon can put the nail in the coffin of the indoctrination mill that is K through 12 certification.
Christians have a similar problem. We have some bad seminaries. You get a bad seminary, you get a bad pastor, you get bad congregants. Correct. It's the same kind of thing. And we're doing it at the school level. And look, if you start indoctrinating kids into bad ideas, is it any wonder you're going to get bad behavior? No.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And the problem is that this is a public funded, it's a national problem. Almost nobody's talking about it. And so what we tried to do with the grievance study stuff, the Sokol Squared, is we tried to alert people to the wholesale corruption in certain fields. These fields are bogus. They're hurting people. They're spreading false information. Public policies are being formed around these things. And it's just like fat studies was a great example of that. We published a paper, the professional bodybuilders lost their minds about this, in which we argued that, I can't remember the name of the paper, like overcoming, I can't remember it. Fat
shaming or something.
So people should, they don't use the word obese because obese, they call it a medicalized narrative, should be able to go into competitive bodybuilding arenas to display their fat in non-competitive ways. And just, it's in that paper I wrote, it's the final frontier for fat activism. And because I'm a big Star Trek fan, I'm a big science fiction fan, and they said that the final frontier was hurtful to indigenous Americans and take it out. But the bodybuilding people were rather upset by the idea that morbidly obese people should come into their spaces to display their fat. But anyway, my larger point there is this is an example of how these disciplines have gone completely crazy, and they're there to forward narratives. They're not there to find the truth. But all of those at core comes from teacher certification. That's the root of the whole problem.
Teacher certification. And is it any wonder why Johnny can't read anymore? It's because
that's the other thing.
Go ahead.
Johnny can't read. I can answer that in a quick nutshell. Johnny can't read because we know what works and we know it doesn't. Whole language doesn't work. Phonics works. The other reason Johnny can't read is we know there are criminogenic factors. We know that, and people are going to look at this and say, oh, Boghossian, he's some kind of conservative. I'm just telling you what the data is, man. You can deny it. You can, and you're more than what I want you to. I want people to deny this. I don't want people to believe me. Is if you look on the data, and you can find some of this stuff in Matt Thornton's latest book. He's under a live estate, but Twitter. He's written a lot of stuff about this. The gift of violence is if there's an adult male in the home. We know.
Oh yeah.
That we know that it's a criminogenic factor. Kids are more likely to wind up incarcerated. We also know that has an effect on reading and academics in general, whether or not there's an adult male in the home. So anyway, people are going to say, I just want to say, I'm sorry, I'm a little discombobulated, but I want to get so much out in this conversation. I think that every time we have any of these conversations, and, I've done so many things with Billboard Chris, Billboard Chris, he has the billboard, children cannot consent to puberty blockers. I think It's really important to get beyond the fact of, oh, the Democrats believe this, it must be bad. Oh, the Republicans believe this, it must be bad because I'm a Democrat or Republican. I had Jesse Pelton on the show, and I talked to him about solar energy, and which I think is one of the most important things for our country right now. Solving the debt is one, although I've kind of given up since Trump passed the big, beautiful bill. Solving the debt is one, and there's a wonderful chart. There's been no rich country that's energy poor. And I asked him, why is it that, what have Republicans failed on? And he said that Republicans think that solar is just this is like leftist thing. And because the leftists are in favor of solar, we have to be against it. But solar and nuclear and other things, but solar primarily is part of the answer to our energy crisis. But I only mention this in the larger context of we have to get beyond the fact and think, oh, the right believes this, the left believes this about trans or about, some, homosexuality. It's just forget about all that stuff. Like, what does the data say? Like, what is the evidence? Figure out what the evidence is. Then you can figure out what to do with it.
As I mentioned in the previous show, we're writing a book right now, me and Phoenix Hayes, called The War on Reality, and it's dealing with these kind of issues. I just want to read a short section of it because it kind of sums up some of our discussion, Peter, although you might not agree with all this. But the problem with Marxism is a philosophy that believes old racism can be solved with new racism. Demands equal rights for all humans except the unborn and oppressors. Preaches inclusion, tolerance, and diversity. Unless your views are too diverse, then you're excluded and not tolerated for everyone's safety. Swears gender has nothing to do with biology and then demands surgeries to make one's biology match their self-proclaimed gender. Condemns colonizers for not assimilating, yet insists immigrants shouldn't assimilate. Wants open borders, but triple locks their front door. Thinks immigration laws are xenophobic, but a no trespassing sign on a tribal land is sovereignty. Posts about the evils of capitalism using their latest iPhone made by capitalism. Thinks free speech or thinks speech is violence, but actual violence is mostly peaceful. Right?
Yeah. So I agree with much of that. So here's part of the problem. Part of the problem is that if somebody doesn't buy into the law of non-contradiction, because I'm sure a lot of people, not Marxists because they fall in that traditional, but certainly postmodernists.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, like for me and you, for you that makes sense. I'm for abortion in the first trimester, et cetera. We can have that conversation, but a lot of these people don't find a problem with contradictions in their belief system. So they would say, Aubrey Lloyd has this piece, the master's tools can only dissemble or disable the master's. The master's tools can't do that. So you can't use reason, science, evidence, anything to overthrow the systems of oppression and power. You have to use other tools. You have to use, so for them, not the Marxists again, because they're more in a modernist framework, but anybody in a postmodern framework, I would call it hypocrisy, but they would call it contradictions itself, a Western white colonial idea.
As opposed to it not being a Western white colonial idea.
Well, I mean, obviously it's not.
Yeah, they're using the very law of non-contradiction they're denying is of any value. Right?
Yeah, that was Habermas's critique of Derrida. He said that it was a performative contradiction. and
Yeah.
your guests can look that up, performative contradictions. But the problem with that is that nobody. So listen, Frank. All this is just verbal behavior. Nobody actually believes any of this. Nobody believes this when, for example, I'll give you two quick examples. When they go to the bank with a $10 bill and they want, and they get the change and they're given 8 cents. And
Right.
nobody's like, well, that's just your truth.
That's right.
Nobody says that. And when they break their leg, when they fall down the stairs, virtually nobody would call the witch doctor. Everybody would go to the hospital, right? So like people by and large don't believe what they profess to believe. It's verbal behavior, and it's behavior to fit in and conform. It's virtue signaling with the community.
The problem is it's verbal behavior that becomes a mind virus in some people who then get up on a building and shoot my friend in the neck.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely correct.
And that's why I admire what you're doing, Peter. You're devoting, look, you and I are both about in the fourth quarter of our lives.
Yep.
And you're devoting what could be retirement for you. You're devoting the time you have left to actually save civilization from the barbarians who, although they can't, they can't articulate an argument for their view. They can certainly pick up a weapon and try and enforce it. And
yeah, well, I was going to say something to you at the beginning of the show when you said, trying to save Western Europe and America. I'm not trying to save Western Europe. They're done. They're completely toast. They're in hospice. I don't think there's anything that can be done. And the reason is because they're not honest about the nature of the problem.
Well, that's true. And I like the way you say that. They're in hospice now. Yeah. Unless something, there's a new party in the UK. It's called the Reform UK Party. I just met Dr. James Orr, who is, hang on a second.
I've done an event with him. Matt Goodwin's a very, very close personal friend of mine. I'm happy to connect you, get him on the show. I just saw him at AmFest recently. Oh, yeah. And here's his card, senior advisor to Nigel Farage. Did I say that right? Yeah. And Reform UK, he said they got about 33% of the population, which at this point is a plurality because the other groups are scattered. So they're hoping that they can get enough political power to turn immigration around in the UK. Whether they'll be able to do that or not, it's not possible.
The current madness that's going,
not possible.
Can we talk about one thing before I want to ask you more about the grounding of morality? But this nonsense term Islamophobia. Yeah. In my view, Islam, well, it's not just my view. I think this is true. Islam is not a race. It's not an ethnicity. You're going to find Muslims of every race and ethnicity. Islam is a political/religious ideology that wants to put the world into submission under Sharia law. There's no reason to not be concerned about that.
Okay. So
what's your view on this?
So you could do a genealogy. Here's my take.
Yep.
My take on that. So I think it is both a bogus term and I think it is a useful term. I do think that there are some people who are genuinely fearful of Muslims. And I do think that many Muslims have weaponized that term to buttress or protect any criticism of Islam. So we have to make some distinctions. Ideas do not deserve dignity. People deserve dignity. And so any idea should be on the table. And so I'm radically against any blasphemy laws. I'm against any kind of political correctness as it's institutionalized, certain words you can't say. Just parenthetically, someone told me the other night when I can't remember. Oh, I used the word midget. And someone told me then that I can't use that word. And I said to her, oh, is there a place I can go to figure out what words I can and cannot use? And of course, there's no place you can go. So people are just kind of grasping onto these things. But I do think that there are some people who are fearful of Muslims. With that said, I also think that there is no render unto Caesar in Islam. And so I do think that it's a largely political religion in a way that Christianity is not a political religion. And so I think that there's a delicate balance to be made from the fear and the antagonism that some people actually have towards Muslims because they're Muslims, and the being honest with oneself about the nature of the problem. For example, the Rotterdam gangs the grooming gangs that Douglas Murray writes about so eloquently, and that Matt Goodwin and Eric Kaufman and others have talked about.
Here's part of the problem, and Charlie used to make the distinction between macro Islam and micro Islam.
Right.
Macro Islam is a problem. It's been a problem for 1,400 years. Wherever Islam takes over a society, freedoms go away. Micro Islam is your buddy next door who happens to be a Muslim who may not agree and does not agree with Sharia law. The problem is the micro people, when the Muslims gain a majority, typically do not resist the more radical elements, and Sharia law is put into place anyway. I mean, how often do you hear Muslims speaking up against jihad, even though they may not personally believe it?
All right, I'm going to push back on you. Here's my take on this.
Okay.
So in the last,
what I'm supposed to say now, Peter, is agree with me now. It'll save time. No, I'm just kidding.
I thought you were gonna push that button.
Wrong.
But go ahead.
Oh my God, that was funny. Okay, what were we just talking about?
I'm saying that when Muslims get a majority, typically freedoms go away, and even if an individual Muslims don't agree with Sharia law, they tend to capitulate.
Okay. I got the idea.
Okay,
so
go ahead.
I'm gonna defend these people. And I'd say this most sincerely. One thing we've learned in the last maybe, 15 years, even when things were just so demonstrably idiotic and absolutely evident to anybody with a half a brain that what a woman is, people did not speak up in the West. Secular people, in fact, secular people were the worst. Atheists were the worst. They were the ones that were leading this kind of secular jihad. People did not speak up against men and women's sports. They didn't speak up about anything because they were afraid about getting canceled. Forget having your head sawed off with a butter knife. And so I think we've seen in our own society, it's not merely cowardice, although cowardice plays a large part, but I think it is not fair to expect Muslims to stick up. And I know people are going to lose their mind when I say this, but I actually sincerely believe it's true. It's not fair to expect moderate Muslims to speak up against radical Muslims because we didn't even do that in our own society with things that were clearly idiotic.
Okay. Let me agree with you that is the tendency of human beings to, used to be a saying in the Soviet Union went like this: the tallest blade of grass always gets cut first.
Oh yeah. The Australians call that tall poppy syndrome. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. We're all cowards in certain areas because we don't want to experience any kind of pain that courage may bring out. We're going to stand up. We're going to get persecuted. But so you're basically, if I understand you right, Peter, you're saying that because people in the West don't stand against oppression, we can't criticize, say, Muslims who don't stand against oppression in their communities.
Close. I think it needs slightly more precise formulation as I look at it. We haven't stood up against clearly false, clearly wrong, morally wrong, factually wrong. We haven't done any. We just watched wholesale institutions collapse and cave. And that's the other thing. It's still going on. This whole, puberty blockers for kids, double mastectomies for girls who have no medical. It's still going on. It's still going on. And so we've been unable to, and those people who originally did speak out against it paid a price. And so we haven't been able to do it when the consequences were lower. They were just financial consequences. So I think it's extremely unreasonable to expect moderate Muslims, to speak out against extremists because in their case, they'll actually be murdered.
Yeah.
They will actually, death. And so I do think that's an unreasonable expectation that we have.
Oh, no, it is. I agree. It's an unreasonable expectation, but our immorality doesn't justify their immorality, is my point.
Yeah. I think
our cowardice doesn't justify their cowardice.
Correct. They could say the same thing about you.
Exactly.
You like they could say,
Agreed.
well, how can we do this? You guys didn't even do this.
Agreed. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
All I'm saying, though, from a political perspective, the idea that says that it's only the radicals that we need to worry about might not be actually true.
Yeah, look.
Because if you have more of a particular group that's going to acquiesce to the more radical elements, you still have that political issue that Sharia law is going to be politically imposed. Am I wrong?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, the solution to this stuff is very simple, and yet it
Jesus,
is absolutely.
Thank you. It's Jesus. Admit it, Peter.
No, I don't admit that. I will say that maybe
what you want to say is this.
Wrong.
I need one of those buttons.
That's right.
Yeah. So look, the solution to this is obvious, but yet it's impossible to achieve. Less so in the United States, more so I'm specifically talking about the UK and Western Europe, is that you just have to limit the number of immigrants who come into the country. I would suggest a 5-year moratorium, but even for, bracketing that for a second. And I just want to be again clear that I am for immigration. My grandparents came here legally, but I'm for legal immigration.
And you're for assimilation.
I'm completely for assimilation. I don't care if anybody's a Muslim. I don't care if they're Christian, Hindu, atheist. I don't care. As long as they're ready to assimilate and contribute to society and let people live the kind of lives that they want to live.
As long as they agree with our Constitution and will support our Constitution.
I have no problem with that. But here's the problem in a nutshell. And here's how you solve this problem. And here's why it is insoluble. You have to prevent. The first order of business is you have to prevent illegal immigrants from coming into the UK, for example, or Western Europe. But they can't do that because I think yesterday I just read 238 illegals. We have no idea who these people are, but here's what we do know in terms of their background. We know they're young, male, and largely, if not exclusively, unskilled. You can't even talk about a solution until you talk about figuring out ways to blockade it and just not let Poles have figured out. The Hungarians, I've been to that border. So, unless you're willing to stop people coming in dinghies, you cannot solve this problem. It is completely insoluble. And they're not willing to do that. So, well, then your civilization will collapse. It's inevitable.
So it's a matter of the will, really.
Well, yeah. And I've argued for years that you should negotiate a surrender now. So if they negotiate a surrender now, they can pay the jazeera, the tax, and minimalize it. I've actually thought about going and speaking, unofficially, of course, on behalf of the surrender of the British people. And my first order of business is I would be a hard negotiator, and I would demand that the Jews be allowed to leave, and that the punishments for homosexuality be limited to 10 years, no hard labor. So those would be my non-negotiables. But we know that surrender is inevitable. I mean, there's no other option. All you need to do is just look historically and practically in the world. And they're not willing to do what it takes. And even before this, we talked about first principles. They're not willing to be honest about the nature of the problem. And it's good. I mean, I don't live there, so best of luck to you.
Yeah, it is tragic. They are our
it's inevitable,
great grandparents, if you will.
It's inevitable. It's inevitable. It's inevitable. This is what happens when people are not honest.
It's inevitable unless there's a Christian revival and people start reproducing. If we don't reproduce the Muslims, you're right, because
won't work.
Or convert.
I'll tell you exactly why it won't work. Because Christians are having the native population is having
1.8.
Fewer kids. But what they don't tell you is the age. The age that which you have kids matters. The native population are having kids older and the immigrants are having kids younger. That's the first problem. But even if you were to do that, you would still have to stop the flow of illegal immigrants.
Yes.
And you're just not, so you could talk about having 10 kids, but if you're taking in 238 people a day and that number is slowly going up over time, well, what are you going to do? And that's just the UK.
Yeah.
So there's nothing you can do. There's literally nothing you can do about it. You're done. The society is over. It's in hospice. And the sooner that you're honest about that, it's great. I mean, you have, again, this is a long conversation. We could talk about it, but there's no point in trying to convince anybody of anything unless you're willing to talk honestly about the nature of the problem.
And take action to solve it.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to take action to solve it, forget about it, as we say in New Jersey.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. could it be then that the society in which you're involved is not a society worth preserving? Seems to me the answer is yes, if you're not willing to fight for it.
Yeah. Hey, Peter, let me ask you this. And this is in the spirit of your book, which is Manual for Creating Atheists. And the newer book is How to Have Impossible Conversations, correct? I just have the first, I don't have the second. I just want to ask you a question just so I can understand where you're coming from. Peter and I are not having a debate here. I want to understand where you're coming from as an atheist or maybe an agnostic. I don't know where you are. Atheist. Okay. By the way, how do you define atheism?
Great question. I do not think there's sufficient reason to justify belief in a god or gods, but if I were given that evidence, I would believe.
Okay, good. So you're open then.
Well, of course.
Yeah. Okay, good. The biggest issue that we all agree on, but I would argue that the Christian has grounding for this, is morality. You're obviously a moral objectivist. You think certain things are objectively right and objectively wrong. So
correct.
From the atheist perspective, how do you ground that? Why do we have these objective moral values that it's objectively morally wrong to say murder people for converting away from Islam than not?
Yeah, so the point of agreement there is I absolutely believe it is the punishment for apostasy should not be death. Mm-hmm. So just so that we're completely fair. Now,
and as a negotiator, you're going to, that's right. Right. Otherwise, you know what, Peter, you're going to hear?
You're fired.
Okay. That'd be kind of funny if you had me on. I'm like, yes, kill everybody. Yeah. So then the question is like, well, why would I believe that? And so at some point you have to invoke a first principle. And the first principle, my first principle would be, and I realize that the accusation of smuggling is William Lane Craig said this about Harris, that he's, smuggled in this idea of well-being in the moral landscape. Right. So I don't smuggle it in on being explicit. I think you can derive, just as you can think critically about, investments or what have you, Tesla's up today, so too can you think critically about moral matters. I think that there are moral facts. I think that those facts are rationally derivable. I think that just as like if you put me in front of a piano, I could play chopsticks. That's it. I have no expertise in playing piano. Some people have expertise in playing piano, but isomorphically, that there are some people who have moral excellence and some people who don't have. The Taliban has the opposite. The Taliban are like me with chopsticks on the piano. So I think that those are rationally derivable because there's such a thing as moral facts.
Okay, I would agree with you on the epistemology of that. The question is the ontology. Why are there moral facts? Yeah. Why is it wrong to murder people for changing their religion? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So that's a far more difficult question, and there are a few answers to that. I'm not sure that putting a question word in front of a bunch of other words makes a legitimate sentence. Like why is something? I think that's a kind of a linguistic problem. I don't mean to be overly philosophical.
Okay.
But
no, go ahead.
I think, yeah. Well, I also think that we can derive there are certain types of lives that are better than other type of lives. Like, if you're living in, like, I guess a simple example is dental pain, right? I've never met anybody who likes dental pain. I think that a world in which we had good dental care would be better in a world in which we do not have dental care. And I just want to say as an aside, I find it fascinating how people glamorize tribal societies. I went on Leighton Smith's show and I got a crazy amount of flack for that. Living in a stagnant society for hundreds, if not thousands of years is not a positive thing. Removing the method of error correction is not a positive. Immiserating people in poverty and despair where they die at young ages when they have no technology to take care of themselves, like dental technology, is not a positive thing. But I can make that. I don't need an ontology to make that claim. All I need to do is to just say what contributes to human flourishing. We could talk about compassion. We could talk about kindness. We could talk about human decency. But you have to have some first principles to have a moral architecture.
No, I think we could all agree on that. But my question is, why should we be concerned about human flourishing at all if there is no ultimate objective meaning or purpose to life, there is no standard beyond us that we're obligated to obey. You might be concerned about it.
Yeah.
But Hitler isn't. Hitler's just concerned about his own moral or well-being and the well-being of the Aryan race. He's not concerned about anybody else. So why is Hitler wrong and say we are right as
well, okay, so Habermas, I'm being attacked by bugs here. Habermas calls that dark modernism, the idea that the German philosopher, the idea that people use reason instrumentally for bad purposes. So reason is like an instrument. You can use it to accomplish certain ends. The question then becomes, how do you know what ends? I might have to move. I'm being eaten alive here. How do you know what ends?
You're in LA. There are no bugs in LA. What are you doing,
well,
man?
I'm by a swimming pool here.
Oh,
I can show you the swimming pool, but I'm by a pool, but the mosquitoes are having it. Okay, well, that would be another example. Like, why don't I want mosquitoes to bite me? Why don't I just sit here while they just, eviscerate my arms? Right. Because it's uncomfortable. It makes me miserable. And if the response to that, some guy in my class said, what if some greater understanding evolves? I was talking about I can't remember, I think the Congo, in particular combat, people would chop off the limbs of other people and just leave them to bleed to death. And I was giving that example that that's morally wrong and that you don't need an ancient book to figure that out. And he said to me, how do you know that some greater understanding didn't evolve from them having had their limbs chopped off? And I could never say this now, of course, but I said, if you actually believe that, why don't you chop off your own limbs? Why don't you give someone a machete and have them saw off your just start with a couple of fingers and then move to an ankle or a knee. The reason is because they don't actually believe that. So you have to have some kind of a first principle. Is I'm a human and I am a rational animal. My first principle would be humanity. Now you could also say, well, why isn't your first principle egoism? Well, you could have that conversation.
Yeah.
But my response to that would be that it may seem far afield, but it's not. The highest type of life that one could lead is a life of virtue. And the highest type of friendship that one could have, friendship is echoing Aristotle. Friendship is only possible between virtuous people or among virtuous people. And you'll never have the richness and fulfilling life unless you have a virtuous life. So I try to live completely transparently in all my relationships. But again, those are rationally derivable principles.
No, I agree. And I don't think you need an ancient book to know basic right and wrong. And even the ancient book teaches that. That's what Romans chapter 2 teaches. My question is the grounding for that. What is the grounding of virtue other than my own self-interest? Because sometimes I can, because of my self-interest, lie to people in order to get what I want to get. And why is that wrong if there is no standard outside of myself that is telling me and has established I ought not lie and do right, even if it hurts me?
All right, so I'll answer that question directly, and then I'll jump off from there.
Yeah.
So I think you can, the history of Western intellectual thought is littered with people trying to figure that out. Kant, for example, has the categorical imperative. Bentham and Mill have utilitarianism. So we have this deontology, we have virtue ethics, what kind of life I want to live, all these questions. Ultimately, the answer is you have to have some kind of principle that you invoke to figure this out. And
right. Again, is that just a personal principle, or is that principle outside of ourselves that is imposing oughtness on us?
That's a great question. That's Plato's or Socrates' question in the Euthyphro. Is it pious because the gods love it, or do the gods love it because it's pious? Right. I don't have an answer to that question. I think that there's something about, and I could be wrong about this, but I think that there's something inherent in reason and the human condition that's the groundwork that allows for the possibility of living a better life. And I think reason is the tool to allow people to do that. And I think that once you have a kind of structure for that, then you can rationally derive certain principles: integrity, what it means to be virtuous, what it means to be honorable, chivalry if you're on a date, for example.
Yeah, I do. And maybe we could have a longer discussion and another show. I think reason is a great tool toward that end, but reason alone can't tell you ought to do something. That's
why you do need to, and many atheists will not be honest about this, or they'll be relativists. You do need to have something that you, I don't want to say smuggle in, but something that you explicitly acknowledge you're doing.
Right.
Eudaimonia or happiness or I don't think it's happiness, but some conglomeration, or maybe it's a Venn diagram of symbols. But so I'll throw this out
Yeah.
to you, kind of playing on that. So I think Christians have exactly backward the following: how can you have a meaningful life or a purpose-driven life if there's no objective or greater, kind of God, a figure? And my thinking on that has always been, if there were, Hitchens called it a celestial dictator, but if there were something external in the world in which you could look to for meaning and purpose, your life could never be, like subspecies aeternitatis. Your life could never be truly meaningful unless you don't have that. It's only because there is no objective, I don't want to say God or gods, because that will, but that's actually what it is. It's only because you don't have that you have the possibility of having purpose and meaning in your life. There's no ledger that's out there eternally.
But then that purpose or meaning would just be subjective. It wouldn't be objective. It would just be what I want. Hitler wanted to kill the Jews.
Right.
It would be Churchill wanted to save them.
Yeah. It would be subjective if you just had meaning. It would be objective if the purpose of your life, how you choose to live your life, hooked onto rational dictates.
Right, but rational dictates are not moral dictates. That's my issue.
Well, that's where I think the source of our disagreement is. I think rational dictates are moral dictates because if there are moral facts, so there are three possibilities.
Yeah.
There are moral facts, which I believe and you believe.
Right.
There are no moral facts, which a lot of atheists believe. Oh, and other people of other religions believe there are moral facts.
Right.
And then there's so those are the two basic possibilities. Now there are others. There could be moral facts, but our meat brains, as the Oxford professor Nick Bostrom says, our meat brains are not intelligent enough to figure out these moral facts. Like, we need some kind of sophisticated AI and solve the problem in Go of like Rule 72 or something. So we need something more sophisticated through the tools of kind of some hyper rational agent, some agentic AI to figure it out.
Like God.
Or
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Something beyond us.
Something beyond us that we make. But in any and all of those cases, so it's easier if you don't think that there's any objective morality, anything relative, then you don't have to justify anything. But if you fall into the condition in the camp that I fall into, I mean, think about it like this. This is another thought experiment. Think about it like this. So let's say that there's a kind of meteor. I've been really interested in this 3I Atlas comet that's coming toward, and I've been following Avi Loeb and all these other people who speculate that it's alien technology. But let's say that it's just going to scrape the surface of the, go tangent to the Earth. And then doing that, thanks for, sticking with me in the thought experiment. Doing that, it's going to have some horrific, we're going to have diarrhea 10 times a day. We're going to, lose our...
Without eating at Taco Bell.
Yeah, without no Taco Bell. 50% of our vision is going to be gone. We're going to vomit 10 times a day. I'm using the number 10 because I'm going to come back to it. So let's say that somebody works really hard in their lives and develops some kind of a semi-vaccine in which we go from vomiting and having diarrhea 10 times a day to having it only 5 times a day. I think we would both agree that we can use the word good for that. So that is a good thing. And then similarly, we have some maniac who thinks this is a great idea, and they want to make us have diarrhea 20 times a day, and then they start experimenting on people, et cetera, children, for fun. I think we both agree that we can tag the word bad with that. So if we agree to that, we don't need any ancient book. We don't need any greater truth. We can figure out what the word good means and what the word bad means. And once we've figured that out, then we can create an infrastructure around which these generalizable principles can be thought of, operationalized, and thought of in a meaningful way.
Yeah, but that smuggles in the idea that human beings and comfort are good things, and pain and human beings aren't really all that important. On the other hand, so
it smuggles in ideas.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
correct.
that,
You're always going to have to presuppose something.
yeah, that's what I'm trying to get back to, that first assumption. And where does that come from? Or that first oughtness, where does that come from? Because it just can't come from us. Otherwise, it's just two people having opinions over moral issues, rather than here's where we're going, here's who we are. We're all made in the image of God. And so because of that, everyone needs to be treated with respect, and people are valuable. If we don't have that, then we're just really intelligent roaches.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking about the comet example of scraping the planet and making everybody sick. You everybody, you can find someone in India, Delhi, some village in a Ugandan fishing village or whatever. Nobody wants diarrhea 10 times a day. Like, at the very least, somebody wants a choice for that.
Right.
And I think that if we can get people to agree on that one thing, which seems to be very simple to agree on, then you can form an architecture. Like, you can say, okay, things that lead to the good life are good, and we can get more granular and talk about those things. But I don't even think you need to talk about meaning or purpose or any of that. You can just say the alleviation. Like my dad, for example, when he got a cavity, this I'm not making this up. This is I know I got 500 comments. This isn't true, but it's actually true. He would get it without Novocaine.
Wow.
Now, that's completely inconceivable to me. Like, utterly, I want to be like as out as possible. I want the whole thing to be numb. But even in that context, he had a choice. So you could invoke the other principle that you can choose. People should be able to choose the kind of lives that they want to lead. So, like, all of this stuff, once you've established what good and bad is, the rest of it is just filling in.
No, you're right. But that's still the question. How do we establish what good and bad is? Because we could all agree that killing an innocent man might quell a mob, but that doesn't mean we ought to do it, right? Because we think human beings are inherently valuable. Why are they inherently valuable? Well, they can't be inherently or eternally valuable if there is no eternity.
Yeah, so killing an innocent man is a great example, Frank, because people have long thought in conversations about the death penalty, how many innocent people would have to die before the death penalty would be justified. And, it's long taken as an apodictic truth that it's better to let a guilty man go free than to condemn or kill an innocent man. But
another moral principle,
yeah, but still, we've wrestled with that. And that's the other thing about morality and thinking about these things. These are really messy issues. These are not easy issues. I came to my conclusions about abortion and other things. I had to be kind of dragged along to some of the conclusions, which is actually another question. Should you be comfortable with all of your moral opinions? I think that there's some deeper, if you're comfortable with everything you believe morally, it's probably something that's not functioning well in your moral apparatus, would be my suspicion.
Yeah.
I'm not comfortable with a lot of moral opinions I have.
No, I agree. But I would also say that difficult problems in morality don't negate easy problems in morality. Similar to, like, difficult problems in calculus don't negate easy problems in arithmetic. And most of the moral problems we struggle with are easy. I mean, not struggle with. Most of the moral problems we have every day are easy. They're not complex. But I think that's the case because there's an ontological category known as justice and righteousness outside of ourselves that we're obligated to obey. We more have been talking about the epistemological outcome of, once we agree on what that is, how can we set up a society that accomplishes that? I'm still trying to get back to the ontological grounding of it, but
I don't buy any. I don't think there's anything other than, I'm a naturalist, so I don't think there's anything outside the natural world. But I was thinking as I was talking to you, I could be wrong about all of this stuff. I mean, it really could be. Maybe it's just I have some weird kind of egoistic, self-aggrandizing thing. I want to think that but it could be that it's really relative. The whole thing is relative, and we're just like hurling through space in a rock. I mean, I guess actually think about that. So instead of the comet coming down and scraping the planet, let's say it kills all of us.
Yeah.
then what's that say about Jesus or what we believe? I mean, if, of the meaning of life or the purpose of life. Kurt Vonnegut has that great story about, the these creatures, there's no faster than light travel, there's no FTL. So these creatures have to go from one area of the universe to on the other end of the universe, people living there. And they want to deliver these messages to them. But little beyond halfway through, the ship breaks down and they go to some planet, but they don't have the technology to fix the ship. So they have to basically seed the whole planet with DNA and wait until these people are technologically developed. Then they take the part from them and they continue on the mission and they deliver it. Turns out to be some innocuous message like, hi there. But asking the question, what is the purpose of life or what is the meaning of life? Well, for those people who were just seeded on a planet from aliens, the purpose of their life was to just contribute to their progeny to develop a technology so someone could steal it and take it and continue on with a meaningless journey. So, I mean, the whole concept of what does it mean to have a meaningful life? Or what is the purpose of life? I think you'd rethink that rather quickly if, a large asteroid were going to come and wipe out all life from Earth.
Well, unless that was the way the whole thing ended and then there was an afterlife. That could be the case. Right? I mean,
anything would be possible. I guess it's just like how likely are the outcomes. I mean, I attribute it, Dawkins in the God Delusion, I think he puts it at a 6-9 on a scale from 7, the Dawkins scale, if there's a God. And I think subsequently he amended that to like 6-9-9-9 or something like.
Well, would you consider yourself a materialist, Peter?
It depends what you mean by that.
Like we're just moist robots. We're just molecular machines. There's no immaterial realm.
I think if you take the ghost out of the machine, there's only the machine. But I think we're thinking machines.
Okay, so I
belong to the David Deutsch Karl Popper School. Yeah.
Would that mean that you're thinking machines in the sense that you do have a mind, not just a brain, that you have a soul, not just a body?
No, I don't think we have a soul, but I think that we have ways to, I think it's possible for us to apprehend broadly what's outside of us. I think it's possible for us. That's why your starting assumptions are so important in all of this.
Right.
Because if your starting assumptions are wrong, then you'll create realities outside yourself that you think will bring about your own flourishing, but won't. So the starting premises we have about reality are key. That's why the postmodernists have all these starting assumptions that are just, clearly false.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's anything. Not only do I not think there's anything outside the natural realm, I don't even understand how we could know that there was anything outside the natural realm. I don't think there's anything that points to it. I don't think there's any not even a literal particle of evidence for that.
But don't you think that the very laws of logic that you're using to say that are not made of molecules? They're metaphysical principles. So you know them intuitively.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're metaphysical principles. I would say that. So even for that, you need to invoke some kind of a dualism. I'm not a dualist. I'm more of a monist. I think that it's the particles themselves that give rise to the possibility of making logical inferences about things.
But then if we're driven completely by the laws of physics, why should we trust any of our thoughts?
I'm not sure we should. I think doubt's a virtue. I'm not sure we should.
But you're not sure about doubt being a virtue, are you?
No, not really. I mean, I think, here's another way, the Popperian way of thinking about it would be to just, and this is something that I've been switching to more and more in my thinking as I get older, 59 now. I think holding something as provisionally true is important. And I think that the way to do that is always ask yourself, what would it take to change my mind? How do I falsify that? But I also think that there are some attitudinal dispositions that people possess that themselves are almost definitely irrevisable. Mm-hmm. And one of those would be the willingness to revise a belief. And I think that is, so here's the other thing. I think that the willingness to revise a belief is not just epistemically beneficial, but I think it's a moral virtue.
Okay. But having the ability to revise a belief would require you have free will, which would mean you can't be completely a molecular machine. You can't be a moist robot and change
Yeah.
a belief freely.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that too. I'm not a big fan of free will, and I think that I think we think that we have far more agency than we do. But it's a weird thing to say, but I'm kind of a little bit of a compatibilist in terms of free will. I think we have some agency in terms of what we can think about. I taught critical thinking for decades, and one of the conclusions that I came to as a result of that is that the most important thing that you can do in teaching critical thinking is to teach people that there are certain attitudinal dispositions that will lead them to the truth is not exactly right, but make it so that they're less wrong more often. And the willingness to revise a belief is one of those things.
So they do have the will to do that.
I wouldn't say will, but I would say, and again, this is linguistically or semantically tricky. And I don't mean to say this in a way that I obfuscate your point, because I acknowledge your point and I hear you. But I think it can be looked at naturalistically as a function of the brain and as an evolutionary product, like throwing spears. Dawkins calls it the Middle Kingdoms, throwing spears at gazelles in the savannah. If you didn't do that, pygmies in I don't know what they call it, the politically correct word for pygmies is anymore.
It doesn't matter. Go.
Yeah, in Australia, we know they have some of the best spatial recognition of anybody, even better than Ashkenazi Jews. And it's been hypothesized that the reason that they have such good spatial recognition is because those who didn't make it back to the encampment or the settlement or what have you died. And so evolutionarily, over time, they developed this rather extraordinary ability. I think you could look at that as a heuristic for how evolution has helped us to think and mold ideas about survival mechanisms. That's why, for example, it conveys no evolutionary advantage to understand quantum mechanics. That's why we don't understand quantum mechanics. It's not because there's a logic that escaped us. It's because it didn't confer a survival advantage on us to understand what happens inside of a black hole or what happens in the quantum realm. But you can, to use a phrase from H.A. Ayer, dry size goods, like in the Middle Kingdom, Dawkins calls it, like what we have here. We can successfully navigate this world because of our ancestors who didn't die. So you don't need a metaphysic to understand that. You don't need anything outside of naturalistic phenomena to understand how to successfully navigate. And then once you have that, you can also build a layer up from that and think, well, how do we make it, use your word, more comfortable for us? How do you make it so we don't feel dental pain, given that we can, work with these abstractions in our perceptual landscapes?
But is there a problem, though, in Dawkins's view when he says essentially that this conclusion he came to gave us survival advantage, and it doesn't mean it's necessarily true. It's just survival advantage. So
Correct.
If evolution gives us
That's right.
these conclusions for survival rather than truth, why should we believe them?
Yeah, that's correct. And again, I'm not meaning to go down a semantic rabbit hole, but what you said is basically factually accurate. There's some really good stuff Brett Hall, the Australian philosopher of science, has on this. And so the idea is that, again, this is a huge thing. Michael Shermer, my good friend, I just interviewed him the other day. He's written about this pretty extensively.
I've had a couple of debates with Michael.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, he's a very good, very close friend of mine.
I like Michael. We were at University of Stony Brook University in 2015, and we were at in San Jose in 2018.
Oh, is that when they wanted to cancel you guys for talking about gay marriage?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's like, okay, that's wrong. That's just wrong. That's just like dead stop. That's wrong.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so you, me, and Michael agree on so much, even though we have a different viewpoint on the issue of God. I'm just trying to understand your ontological foundation for these things. That's why I'm just asking you the questions.
Yeah. So let me go back to that. So can we say these things are true? It depends what you mean by true. I mean, we can certainly say that we have adapted to these things, and our apprehension of these things makes it more likely that we will survive. Now, can you say it's true? Like, it depends. I just read Shermer's new book, is different definitions of truth and what one means by truth. I mean, it's not mathematically true if that's how one is using it, but it's like a probability vector.
Mhm.
It's just more likely that we can propagate the species given certain priors.
Right. Well, even our discussion right now, even if we were to conclude that that particular way of arriving at a belief
Yeah.
is just survival rather than truth, our conclusion about that is that true. See, you're still dealing with the issue of true or false. And if we're going to say, no, that's also survival, then we're in complete agnosticism about everything.
No, I wouldn't say that. I'd say it is. So that's when you need the linguistic infrastructure. So you can say, if you eat so many calories a day, you will live. So that's something you can get by evolution. That, again, it's a little tricky, but that's the basic idea. But you can say that it is true that, so then it becomes true. But what you're really doing there is you're just looking at truth linguistically in terms, philosophers call it propositions in terms of sentence, what is the sentence? So you can
Right.
say that the sentence is true, but you can't really say that evolution has in any way, evolution isn't oriented towards truth. Evolution is oriented towards survival.
And I don't know if it was Dennett who said Darwinism's universal acid. Somebody said that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the problem is it makes it the universal acid over all of our conclusions, not just our conclusions about whether or not we evolved or were created. All of our conclusions become suspect then if we're saying that all of our thoughts are arrived at by some sort of physical process and we don't have any free will in coming to that conclusion.
Yeah, well, from the selfish gene, Dawkins talked about memetics. And we think about evolution as a biological process, which it is obviously, but
Right.
but there's also kind of a mimetic transmission of ideas. I've been thinking about this. There are these like meme plexes, and this idea that the Overton window moves on things. So certain now an idea is unthinkable, like surrender of the UK, and so now more and more people over time, I predict, will be talking about this. But that's why it's not clear to me. In fact, I don't think that people choose their beliefs. I think that people are largely go along with their culture. Like Barack Obama, for example, in his first term, he was against gay marriage.
Yeah.
And now the Overton window has shifted on that. But
right.
the way that but evolution has a mechanism with the spread of ideas, and how those ideas get spread is largely the result of an evolutionary process, mimetically, that people don't think about or talk about. And I think that's really important when it comes down to human agency and what people believe. I mean, Islam, for example, even Christianity, these are memes, ideas that have been spread out, and there's a kind of survival of the fittest. Some memes die out, some memes thrive, some memes spread, some memes don't. But that can be looked at not as a function of biological evolution, but a function of a mimetic transmission of ideas.
In order for us to have this discussion, it would seem to me that we have to get outside of what, assuming evolution's true, and I don't concede that, but for the sake of our argument, we'd have to get outside of the evolutionary forces driving us to our conclusions to say that all of these conclusions have been given to us by evolution. In order for us to say that's true, we couldn't get that idea from evolution.
Yeah, that's not true. I'll give you some basic examples why. We can understand from like double slit experiments, et cetera, that a particle can be in the same place at the same time, the same particle. Please don't ask me why. I know nothing about it, but Ramanujan, the Indian physicist and the Indian mathematician, came up with a series of mathematics that no one knew what to do with. Now we can apply that largely to what happens inside of a black hole, but we didn't evolve to understand any of that. But we understand that at all, not because of an evolutionary mechanism, but because evolution gave us the tools to apprehend things and apply those tools instrumentally to other realms, like the quantum realm, the realm of the very, very big, etc. But we don't. So we can figure things out that are true that way that conferred no evolution.
Right, but in order for us to say that, we'd have to be outside of the evolutionary machine to say that that's how we got our beliefs. Otherwise, the evolutionary machine gave us the belief that the evolutionary machine gave us these beliefs.
Yeah, okay, you could look at that. That's one way you could look at it. There are others. Like one is if this could be a byproduct of the evolutionary machine. So the byproduct of the evolutionary machine is it enables you to not merely adapt to circumstances to enable prodigy so we can do the hokey pokey and continue another generation, but it enabled you to, oh, the whole family show here. It's a family show.
All right.
But that itself enabled you to, it created the grounds that allowed for the possibility of, for example, manipulating symbols. Wittgenstein in the Blue and Brown books starts with this idea. I haven't read this stuff in a while, but slab for words. The words, the words are the investigations. The words correspond to things, and then once we figure out what words do, we can use words as instruments and tools, etc. So none of those things, all of those things, can be yielded through evolution without needing anything external. You don't need a metaphysics. You don't need anything other than the naturalistic realm to have those things.
Right, but that theory,
yeah,
that theory itself would have to have an objective point of view to say that theory's true. In other words, if evolution is giving us that theory and we don't have free will to arrive at it by evidence, then that theory itself is suspect and all our thoughts are suspect. That's why, in my view, I love what you've done in the book, Manual for Creating Atheists, in the sense of your epistemology. But my point would be that our ability to know anything presupposes that we have a mind and a free will that can take us to rational conclusions rather than natural conclusions.
Okay, so let's go back to the first thing you said.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about mathematics and how we can know the sums of two numbers we've never seen before. So we can. I think mathematics would be a good example of how we didn't evolve to figure out, I don't know, some huge integer plus another integer. I'm terrible at math, So I don't think you need any external thing. I think even thinking that is I don't even see that there's a reason to think that. And I'm not saying you're doing this, but the reason that people could be invoking that in the first place is to try to make sense of something that doesn't seem to make sense. So you need to kind of have some organizing principle that allow for the possibility of making truth pronouncements. But I don't think you need that organizing principle in the same way that you don't really need it for the addition of large integers you've never seen before.
Okay. We could go on talking about this, but we've been at it for 80 minutes. This is the second podcast. And I love talking about this, especially with you, Peter, because even though we don't agree on the God question, it's just fascinating having a conversation with a PhD in philosophy who can hold his own.
But yeah, well, thanks.
Issues.
I love having conversations, and I like, I don't want to be wrong. I want to believe true stuff. And so I really like, and I honestly, I have no animus against any of this stuff. I just want to live a good life, an honest life. That's the awesome thing. I have a nonprofit. I can say and do anything I want to do. I want to go to the slums of Paris. I go. I just want to figure out, especially at this age, my later years, my late middle age, whatever I am. And I would have to say this to your listeners or your viewers, if everybody believes the same stuff as you, man, you got to expand your circle, because that's not good for you. I mean, you need to be challenged and questioned, and if nothing else, it just makes it for a more interesting life, more interesting conversations. I have a lot of friends who are Christians. I have good friends who are Muslims. I knew them from jiu-jitsu. I have a lot of people who believe that I have a donor who's an Orthodox Jew. I have a donor who's an Orthodox Christian. I have another donor who's a trans pornographer. I just think it's really important to have conversations with people with whom you have substantive disagreements. And, none of these things, I'm not offended by any of this. I hope you're not offended. I'm trying to work out my ideas and figure stuff out. But I think people get caught up in this idea that I want to save face, or I want to do this. No, I mean, come on, man, just figure out what's true. And then that people will respect you for that, as opposed to, sticking to your guns.
That's right. Yeah. No, we ought to have conversations with people. And once you're educated enough, ladies and gentlemen, I got one more question for Peter before we go.
Yeah, anything.
Once you're educated enough in our view in Christianity, well, you know what it is, you know the evidence for it. You should be challenged by the evidence if there is evidence against it. You should be challenged by people like Peter, who put out a book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. You ought to read it. I've read Dawkins, I've read Hitchens, I've read all these people because I want to know what they believe.
So think about this. So think this is to me, this blew my mind when I first learned this. So you've read this stuff, you've had friends, you know, we're buddies, you're talking to me, you know, I'm sending you pictures of my midget wrestling debut, etc. Mullah Omar, the former head of the Taliban, in his whole life, he only knew two non-Muslims.
Wow.
That's my blood. That's like Kierkegaard's thing. Everybody's a Christian, thus no one's. Everyone's a Lutheran, thus no one's a Lutheran. Like, I don't. The older I get, the less certain I become that if you haven't really challenged or questioned your ideas, that you can truly believe them.
Yeah, yeah.
I think you can say that you believe them,
right?
But whether or not you can actually believe them,
that's right.
Something different.
That's right. You ought to be challenged, and when you can answer the challenge, it makes whatever you believe, your beliefs, more secure.
Yeah, so that's the other thing. So that's the greatest commonality, or among the greatest commonalities that you and I have, is we both adhere to that principle.
That's right.
So you're willing to debate, and you have extensively, Shermer, Silverman, Hitchens, etc. I'm willing to. I'm less a debate guy. I want more of a conversation like this.
Sure, I like the conversation too.
Yeah, I think it's formal debates, much more productive.
Yeah, we can challenge one another and you know, go back and forth on the point rather than have to wait 20 minutes. You know what you said 20 minutes ago. You know, I hate those debates, the formal debates where they never interact. You know,
yeah, I agree.
It's not really a debate.
This is much better for me, for my style, etc. But my point is that point of commonality is far more significant, far more attributive to a life of virtue than if you believe some guy walked on water. You know, how you treat your dog or your wife or your cat or your neighbors or your friends or me is far more important to me than if you believe some guy turned water into wine. Like, those things are just...
Sure. If a guy did turn water into wine and he is God, we ought to listen to him. But it's...
Of course, but I don't believe he did. Yeah. But of course, yeah.
If you believe in Jesus, you ought to be emulating Jesus. Okay. But I want to ask you one more question before we go. Can I just pause that? Go ahead.
So I would say that even if you don't believe in Jesus, there are many things in the life of Jesus that are worthy of emulation. And when I say believe in Jesus, I'm not talking about the historicity of Jesus, although maybe not. You know, I think that there are many lessons about treating people, turning the other cheek, etc., that are worthy to emulate, even if you don't accept the metaphysics. Culturally Christian, in other words.
Yeah. Good point. And one of the ways, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that you can get ready to deal with ideas that contradict Christianity is to take the course that is coming out just in a week or so. It's called Why I Still Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and I'll be your instructor. And if you take the premium version, you'll get several Zoom sessions with me for Q&A. And we also have 2 courses in logic. They're called Train Your Brain. One's for 6th to 8th graders, and the other is for adults. They'll be right on our website. Go to crossexamine.org, click on online courses. Take those. I'll be involved in both of those as well. Logic, you need to know. Fallacies, you need to know when people are putting out fallacies and how to answer them. Also, I want to let you know that I'm going to be at, January 25th, I'll be at Prestonwood Baptist Church down there in Dallas. And we've got a lot more coming up. The college events begin in February. Keep an eye on the calendar for that. Also go to crossexamine.org, click on events. You'll see it there. Peter, here's my final question for you. And we're going to put all Peter's contact information into the show notes. Peter, as Christians, most of the people listen are Christians. We do agree with all the work you're doing to help people realize the value of the freedoms that we have here in America. Tell us what we can do to help you. And if you need donations, if people want to donate to the work you're doing, they can. You can.
That's very kind. I don't need any donations.
Okay.
I would never come on a show and ask for that. But if you want to help, you can maybe subscribe to the Substack or kind of watch some of the videos or comment on some of the videos. But no, I'm absolutely not asking for donations. But I think that the really the best thing you could do is, in the book, How to Have Impossible Conversations, I talk about, like, here are some keys to have conversations. I think if you really want to help, go find someone you disagree with and have a conversation with them. And, listen, really focus on listening, make sure you understand what they say, repeat it back to them. That's one thing you can do because the society, I don't want to see the whole society fall into a cesspool. And I see that happening more and more. And I think one of the prophylactics against that is to start talking to people with whom you disagree. That's one thing. And another thing that I think is important is, you just need to, kind of a subset of that, you just need to sincerely listen to somebody when they say something to you. And I think we've lost, the older I get, the more important listening becomes. I don't know how much I did that today. I hope I did an okay job at that.
Oh, no, you did.
I think it's really important to listen to people, and particularly if the gulf or the divide is too great. So.
Absolutely. And as my wife always says to me, you never listen to me, or something like that. I don't know. Yeah, it's much better than as soon as someone says something, you say, wrong. Okay.
Right.
You ought to have a conversation with them. And that's how you can build friendships. That's how you can win people to your side if you think you're on the right side. Or maybe you just might learn something. Maybe you got something wrong. Right? Yeah. Absolutely. Peter, it's been an honor and a pleasure. And we're Christians, so we're going to pray for you. And you need to report back when you hopefully you'll get back from France. And
I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
For those of you that don't know, he's going into some Muslim areas, and he's going to have some conversations. He's going to put it all on his YouTube channel. So,
yep, honest conversations to figure out what people believe and to just get their message out there, whatever that is.
Peter, you're a stand-up guy, man. I love talking to you. I hope we can do this again.
Thanks. I very much appreciate the fact that you referred to me as our friend. I value our friendship, and I appreciate the fact I think you're a stand-up dude. And I very much appreciate the fact that you had me on and were willing to have these conversations. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. That's Dr. Peter Boghossian, ladies and gentlemen. Check out all of his contact information in the show notes. Look for his YouTube channel and his Twitter account, his X account. Follow him there. He is fighting the good fight for Western civilization. And he is an ally in that regard. And so make sure that you tell others about him. He also has a Substack as well. And we're going to have him back on the show at some point. So thanks so much for being with us, ladies and gentlemen, and God bless. All right, see you next time.
If you're looking for solid answers to life's biggest questions, don't miss the latest episode of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, iHeart, OnePlace, and Podchaser. Tune in, discover the truth, and share it with someone who needs it. Let's keep spreading the truth together.